Fallout Equestria the Chrysalis, Chapter 26, Part 5. Panting, I stepped back, staring up at the monumental fortified door that we were safely on the outside of. Then, I registered the numbers emblazoned across it. 112. I blinked, my ears lying flat.
What? That's not... they're only...
Whisper! Dusty called out, grabbing my shoulder with a hoof. Come on, we're not... Suddenly the hoof was gone. I was already turning to face him, which gave me just enough time to see his head snap around before his rifle blared. I cringed back, ears ringing and vision dazzled. By the time I recovered my balance and got a look in the direction he had fired, I saw a dark form scurrying behind a small storage container. An armored changeling lay crumpled on the ground beside it.
Don't!
I shouted, leaping to Dusty's side.
No killing!
The situation's changed, Dusty replied, keeping his rifle leveled as he jerked a hoof to the side. Move!
Damn it!
I slipped behind him and galloped past rows of pallets, loaded with machinery and scrap metal. There was no point in arguing it now. We were outside of the stable proper, and there was no way that these changelings pitbucks hadn't decided we were entirely hostile. A flash of movement ahead drew my attention, and I swung my rifle around on my magic to aim on a surprised and unarmed changeling.
Don't move!
She replied by instead throwing herself back behind the container she had stepped out of from behind. And while the action was technically contrary to my command, I didn't object. Starlight and Dusty were already passing me, and I picked up the pace, with Sickle close on my heels. We rushed past equipment and containers. The chamber split into two directions. A quick glance down one way revealed about a dozen changelings, scurrying about. I saw no weapons, but we ran the other way. Two changelings in stained coveralls dove behind a partially loaded skywagon as we galloped by. An armored changeling trotted out of the corner ahead of us. Plasma and muzzle flashes lit the dim space for an instant. Dusty tumbled to the ground. The armored changeling staggered back, her rifle swinging away. I brought my rifle around, snapping off several shots. My light rifle sounded like a balefire bomb in the bare concrete chamber, and the flash from the muzzle nearly blinded me. When I stopped firing, the changeling was on the ground, her hooves kicking out. Dusty had rolled onto his belly and snapped off a couple more rounds into the changeling. Her legs kicked again and went still. Dusty leaped to his hooves, and we were galloping again. At some point, I noticed smoke wafting from Dusty's chest, but I didn't have the time to focus or examine it. My head was pounding, and the violent crashing of Sickle's spiked hooves on the concrete floor muted in my ears. A couple more changelings galloped for safety, their abandoned containers of packaged food fallen and spilled across the floor. We leaped over the spilled goods and continued on, passing a half-laden cart and running by a line of motor wagons. We were about halfway past when Starlight shouted out.
Wait!
I skittered to a halt, looking back. Starlight had abruptly veered off, leaping up to the window of one of the motor wagons and nimbly sliding into it. It was then that I recognized that these weren't some ancient rusted-out hulks. They looked like the ones we had seen in the Trotston convoy, armored up, worn from regular use, and by all appearances, fully operational. We turned as one and scrambled after her. The vehicle she had claimed was a rust-colored amalgamation of armor plates, angular and sloping from the thick prow in the front to the heavy machine gun mounted to the roof. My wings flicked as I leapt up over the short rear end, dropping into the narrow open space behind the gun that had once served as an open cargo bed. Now, it was surrounded by armor plates sloping back from the roof. I was just perching my forehooves on the roof beside the gun where Sickle's spiked hoof landed on my back, flattening me into the tiny back seat. The whole vehicle rocked violently as she settled in, occupying most of that rear space. Twisting around to make room, and to avoid being crushed under her, I could barely catch the wild grin on her face.
Yeah, let's fucking do this!
Dusty was hauling himself in through the window beside Starlight, in the row of full-size seats in front of me. How quicken? He was cut off as the vehicle roared to life, lurching forward and throwing me back into Sickle's chest. My helmet slammed into her breastplate with a loud crack, followed by a tremendous slam that threw me sideways into the armored wall of the vehicle. I couldn't tell what was going on outside. I was in a violently shaking can that roared and creaked and banged as it threw me about. Starlight blurted out some unintelligible curse, and the vehicle lurched forward again, swerving wildly as I scrambled to brace myself. Metal scraped violently on the concrete, and Sickle roared with laughter. Grabbing the back of the front seats, I hauled myself up. Dusty was twisting around to brace himself in the passenger seat, while Starlight gripped the motor wagon's steering wheel. Past them was the narrow front window, showing me a thin slice of the outside world just before Starlight jerked the wheel, veering around a concrete pillar. The engine roared, and I clung to the seat before me as she accelerated down the length of the large room. Between the forces throwing me around and the very restricted view, I was just barely able to see the upcoming offshoot.
Starlight!
I shouted, pointing a hoof.
Turn right!
The vehicle lurched, pitching forward with a loud squeal and pressing me against the front seats. Then the engine roared again, throwing me back into the rear seats before the whole world spun again, slamming me into the side of the vehicle, and then back against my seat as the whole vehicle pitched back. An instant later, the reverberating echo of the spark motor cut off as we emerged from the tunnel. The world brightened just in time to twist all around, and for an instant, I found myself floating weightless towards the ceiling. Gravity reasserted itself with a tremendous crash and a sudden spray of dampness. I landed heavily on the floor, wedged tightly between the 2 rows of seats, and chose to simply brace myself in place there. I was rewarded for my decision a moment later when the vehicle swerved and skidded sideways before slamming into something with a deep, hollow drumbeat of metal on metal. Dusty swore from somewhere up front. "Goddesses, damn it, Star, don't kill us!"
Hey, I've never driven before!
She snapped back as the engine roared again.
It's a lot harder than it looks!
Sickle was still laughing. I took the opportunity to scramble up and get into a seat properly. We were outside, and the spray of moisture wasn't blood, as my mind was wanting to insist it must be. But it was instead light rain coming in through the windows. The half-built office building was beside us, with a ramp leading down into the underground storage and parking area. On the other side was one of the abandoned bulldozers, right up against the window after our collision. The wheels of the motor wagon spun in the mud, slipping uselessly for a second before starting to catch, and the whole vehicle shuddered and took off again. I focused on just staying seated, while we quickly tore out past several temporary structures. Dusty grunted from the seat beside Starlight, grabbing a flying strap, then quickly pointed out the front window. "No, go for the high ground! The low ground's on mud! We'll bog down!" The vehicle swerved again, as Starlight oversteered, weaving a few times before settling on the correct course. "And calm down!" Dusty grunted, wincing as he pulled the strap across his chest. I leaned forward. I could still see the edges of where the shot had impacted, with the outer layer of the barding scorched away to reveal warped metal.
Are you okay?
He grunted and nodded, though I saw the tightness in his jaw. "Non-critical. The plate stopped it, just singed me pretty good." He finally got the strap in place and called back. "Sickle, if you're gonna be on the gun, keep an eye out."
Yeah, no shit! Shut the fuck up and let me enjoy the ride!
Dusty grumbled and sat back, hauling his rifle up to rest beside him. I suddenly realized I had lost track of my own. A quick search found it in the bed of the cargo area, between Sickle's hooves, and I floated it back to me. "What about you?" Dusty asked, as I set my rifle on the seat beside me. "You were going good, then he just froze up at the door." My ears pinned back.
That was...
I quickly shook my head, turning to the other window to look back.
It's nothing.
There was a moment of silence from Dusty, before he gave a quiet,
Well, it's just that the door said that was stable 112. But the last stable that Stapletech finished was 101. Stables aren't subtle things, and my hive had enough espionage on Stapletech to steal a stable door and tons of equipment. They couldn't have made more without us knowing.
I frowned, glaring out the window as I tried to ignore the constant spray of rain.
Though I'm sure they were constructing more, even if 101 was the last one they had finished. Where else would we have gotten stable parts from? And if this group had the same kind of resources my hive did, then maybe they finished an incomplete stable. Maybe their hive was the original Serenity, and this was a collab with Stapletech. Maybe like a licensed stable?
A thump sounded through the roof.
Holy fuck!
Sickle called out past the roar of wind and motor.
We just snuck and fought our way through a hive stable full of fuck-ton of changelings and tore out of there in a fucking armored motor wagon, and you're whining that the place had the wrong fucking number?
Are you fucking serious?
Hey!
I shouted up at her.
Factual information is an extremely valuable resource, and—
Enough! Dusty shouted. Focus. We're not out of this yet. I went quiet, though I grumbled under my breath. Of course, Sickle wouldn't appreciate why that detail was so significant. I mean, you can kind of see what Sickle's talking about. They got out of a deadly situation and she's worrying about a number. Anywho, let's get on to our perfect donators. Top donators: Jessie Smith, Zar630, BadassWaffle, Only One Thing, Ceru, Orion, and Caladis. Magivic, Jock, Luciisu, Darkside, Rayden, Runescythe, Will, Twinkie, Luigi, Chancellor, Crust, Big Smoke, Murder Princess, Little Mighty, Solar Symphony, and many more amazing people. Thank you all so much for watching this video and live life to the fullest.